Separate proceedings. To me, Judge, the most efficient way to do that would be to do the first cause number, us to offer our evidence on that cause number, and then the other two cause numbers, when the court takes the plea, the court can just take judicial notice of the evidence.
So the open plea is going to be CR 21-13.
All three of them, 113, 14, and 15, Judge. And that's why I suggested that both parties do all their witnesses on the first case, that your client enter his plea, if that's what he's going to do. Both parties present all our evidence in the first case, close that proceeding, go to the second case, and we just ask that the court consider the evidence given in the first case on the second and the third. Right, I don't want to do it 3 times either.
So let's go ahead and bring Mr. Speaker up. Let's go ahead.
We're not 3, Judge, they're all the same.
All right, court calls for the record call numbers CR 21-113, CR 21-114, CR 21-115. The state of Texas versus Jane Antonio and Spino. Mr. Spino, if you'll raise your right hand, please show your oath.
Your Honor, I can interrupt first. We're asking that the court just call 113.
You don't think, go ahead and hear his plea of guilty.
Only on 113. We're gonna at the end of all 3, we're gonna ask the court to consider cumulative sentences, and therefore the pleas must be taken in separate proceedings. The first proceeding has to be closed, the second proceeding.
So Mr. Espino, cause number CR 21-113. You are charged by indictment with the second-degree felony offense of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. And today you are represented by your attorney, Mr. Jeff White. So at this time, if you'll raise your hand, please your oath. Sir, do you swear that the testimony you give to the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So, yes, sir. Mr. Spino, do you feel like you've had enough time to talk with your attorney, Mr. Jeff White, regarding your rights pertaining to this specific case? Yes, sir. Is there anything about the paperwork that you've read over and signed today that you do not understand? No. And Mr. White, do you believe that Mr. Spino is competent to enter his plea before the court today? You've explained to him his rights as they pertain to this case and the other cases in which you represent. And it's the court's understanding today that there is no plea agreement between the defendant and the state of San Francisco. And so, just a moment, I'm going to admonish Mr. Spino regarding the range of punishment for the offense, and then ask him how he enters his plea. And it's my understanding that your client intends to enter a guilty plea without the recommendation of the plea agreement for the state of Texas. All right. And Mr. White, you also have counseled your client on his rights regarding appeal. Is that correct? That's correct. He knows he has 30 days. In addition, you have also signed and reviewed the certificate of discovery that the state has tendered to both defense and the court. Is that correct? You believe that you have received all of the evidence the state has in its possession regarding your client? I have no reason to believe that they didn't turn on. All right, Mr. Spino, in cause number CR 21-113, the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon is a second-degree felony offense. If you were to be convicted and sentenced, the range of punishment for that offense is not less than 2 years in prison or more than 20 years in prison, and a possible fine not to exceed $10,000. Do you understand that? Do you understand the full range of punishment? Yes, sir. You also understand today that you will be entering a plea to this in just a moment, and if you enter a guilty plea, that will be without a recommendation from the state of Texas regarding plea agreement. You understand? Yes, sir. That means that the state could argue for the court to convict you of this offense and send you to prison anywhere within that range from the minimum 2 all the way up to the maximum of 20. Understand? You also heard that Ms. Curry, the criminal district attorney for Benson County, may intend to ask the court to stack or make sentences in order to be consecutive sentences, meaning that any sentence imposed in this case and any subsequent cases could be run consecutively, meaning that you have to serve one sentence before the next sentence would be. Understanding all that, you still wish to go forward? Is there anything about the paperwork that you do not understand or that you need clarification from either the court or Mr. White? No, sir. All right, then at this time, because of our CR 21-113, Mr. Espino, how do you plead to aggravated assault with deadly weapon? Guilty. Are you pleading guilty to that crime because you are in fact guilty of committing the crime? Yes, sir. Has anyone threatened, forced, or pressured you to plead guilty to this crime? No, Your Honor. Or will accept the defendant's plea guilt at this time? All right, are we ready to begin with our evidence at this time? Yes, sir. All right, we'll go ahead and have a seat at council table. This time, would you like to begin?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. First witness, Judge?
You can have an opening.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Whatever you decide.
Your Honor, I think that when the court hears the evidence that the state has thought to present in this case to support the defendant's plea of guilty to aggravated assault, that the court will be both surprised and irritated at all of the people involved in this offense that chose to come and deal their wares, bring their violence to a rural church in Van Zandt County. I think that when the court hears the evidence in this case, the court will be in a position similar to that of many of us on the state side. This was either a dope deal or this was a robbery from the get-go. And either way, it's bad. And either way, it is not a case that is deserving of probation. I think that's going to be the bone of contention between the parties today, is that the defense is going to ask this court to impose a sentence of probation. I believe that once the court hears the evidence will establish that this young man, in spite of his age, was the mastermind, was in control of whether this was a dope deal or a robbery. He showed up as the only person with a gun, where 2 people wind up shot, and a third came within 2 inches of losing her life. I believe that the evidence will show that this is not a case deserving of probation.
Thank you, Ms. Curry. And let me bring up another preliminary matter that I failed to ask counsel about. The court, in anticipation of the open plea, as indicated by Mr. White, had directed the Van Zandt County Community Supervision and Corrections Department to prepare a pre-sentence investigation report as is required by the Code of Criminal Procedure 484, closing a sentence. Has each, the state and the defense, received a copy of that pre-sentence investigation report?
State that, Your Honor.
And Ms. Curry, on behalf of the state, are there any objections to the pre-sentence investigation report or modifications or additions?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. White, on behalf of Mr. Espino, any objections to the pre-sentence investigation report? No. Any requested additions or deletions? Not at this time. All right.
Your Honor, I will be waiving the statement, but I would like to take it stay in red It's one, which is about the operation. Also, a letter dated December 1st, 2000.
Stay stipulated.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so what are those marked? B1 and 2? All right, so court, having considered the admission of defense exhibits 1 and 2, finds that there is no objection from the state. Court hereby admits D1 and D2 in evidence. All right, defendant has waived opening. Ms. Curry, would you like to call any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. Jeff Hudgens, please.
Officer Hutchins, if you'll raise your right hand, sir, do you swear that the testimony you give to the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be it. Just have a seat. You can move that chair around. Move it up, just make yourself comfortable. It's not necessary that you lean into the microphone, just that you speak up loudly and clearly during the testimony. Allow the attorneys to finish their question before you give an answer, so we're not talking over one another. Emergency vehicle passes by, comes loud, stop testifying. See, that truck happened at the right time. If the attorneys object, stop testifying and let me rule on their objection. Okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Curry.
Would you state your name for our record, sir?
Benjamin Jeffrey Hudgens.
And I see you are an officer, obviously, and how are you currently employed?
I'm currently assigned as the canine officer for the Van Police Department.
And are you a certified peace officer in the state of Texas?
Yes, ma'am.
How are you employed, Officer Hutchins, on July the 8th of 2020?
I was a reserve part-time deputy for the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Department.
And did you have a full-time job as well at that time?
Yes, ma'am. I am a captain with the City of Tyler Fire Department.
Are you still a captain?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'd like to direct your attention back to July the 8th of 2020. You were also a certified peace officer on that date. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And as a captain with the fire department, are you also a qualified EMT?
Yes, ma'am. I'm actually a Texas Department of State Health Services paramedic.
And paramedics higher than EMT, if I
Yes,
understand.
yes, ma'am.
So on July the 8th, Officer Hudgens, were you dispatched or did you respond to an incident at the intersection of 1651 and 198 in Van Zandt County?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you hear about that?
We were in the patrol room at the Sheriff's Department and we overheard radio traffic from an officer from another agency call it in over the radio.
And did you head to that location?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you find when you arrived, sir?
As we came down the hill approaching the scene, there was a vehicle facing north in the northbound lane of that highway. The vehicle was stopped. Someone was out of the vehicle. Someone was still in the passenger side. There were a couple other just passerby vehicles that were stopped just because the road was occluded.
So was the vehicle in the roadway or off the roadway?
It was in the roadway. It was in the middle of the travel lane.
And what type of vehicle was it, if you recall?
It was a little black sedan.
Were there occupants in the black sedan?
Yes, ma'am. There was an individual in the passenger seat. The passenger door was open.
And what was the condition of that individual?
That individual stated to me that he had suffered some gunshot wounds. They were not, as we approached the scene, there was no safety concerns. That's one of the things we look for, but he stated he had been shot down lower. He had some denim shorts on. They were open, but still pulled up. And so as part of what we do for our survey of a patient, we exposed the area of the wound.
And did you in fact observe one or more gunshot wounds on this individual?
Yes, ma'am. Down in the lower abdomen pelvis area.
Do you recall the name of that individual?
I do not. It's in my supplement, ma'am, but I'm sorry. I don't remember which one he was.
And was that I think you said that was the passenger.
Yes, ma'am. Well, he was seated in the passenger seat when I got there. Yes, ma'am.
And was there another person involved?
Yes, there was another individual that said he was in the car and he was up moving around. He was walking around the scene and active and moving. So I gave my priority to the gentleman that was not moving.
So the passenger that you gave your priority to, did you have concerns about that gunshot wound and the severity of it?
Yes, ma'am. The wounds themselves, from my first angle, I couldn't tell if they were entry or exit wounds, but the pelvic cavity as we've been taught, can contain more blood than the human body even possesses. So bleeding internally there is a major concern for us. There's a lot of soft tissue organs, and that's an area that we can't control bleeding by direct pressure. So any wound or bleeding inside that area, and there are some arteries in there, is a major concern.
With those concerns, what, if anything, did you do?
Well, we had notified EMS to respond to the scene, and the scene was secure. I continued to check the patient for additional injury, just a full body assessment, rapid trauma assessment. We located 2 additional wounds on his back, and just a comparison of those wounds, they were a little higher in the angle based on the size. The wounds on the front were exit wounds, appeared to be exit wounds.
So it was your belief that the wounds on the front were exit wounds and the wounds on the back were the actual injuries?
Yes, ma'am. Based on the position of the wounds and the size of the penetrations, it appeared that the ones on front were exit wounds.
And was it 2 and 2 or more than that?
It was 2 and 2 on that individual. Yes, ma'am.
So did you form an opinion as to how many times this individual had been shot?
My assessment of his body and condition, those were the only wounds that I noted. And he was alert and oriented and able to converse with me.
And at some point then, were you able to turn your attention to the other individual that was up and walking around?
Yes, ma'am. He was up moving, had full range of motion, but he presented with a single wound to the back of his left shoulder, but there was no exit wound noted on him.
Non-life threatening?
Well, my concern was that if there was no exit wound, where the bullet or fragment was, and not knowing the angle, it could have possibly entered the lung. And so my concern with him was a pulmonary issue or a pneumothorax in his chest.
So you found what appeared to be an entry wound, but no exit wound?
Yes, ma'am. I just found the single wound in the back of his shoulder.
Did you have occasion to examine the car at all, the interior of the car?
That vehicle, no, ma'am. Just a quick sweep of the interior before I approached that victim to make sure there wasn't anything close by his hands, weapons, or anything like that. But I did not search the entire interior of that vehicle, no, ma'am.
Did you have occasion to look for any evidence of bullets striking the interior of the car?
No, ma'am, I did not on that vehicle. There were other officers on scene securing the scene, so I was focused on just patient care at that point.
And at some point, were the 2 individuals that you examined transported?
Yes, ma'am. They were transferred to the ambulance service.
Ground or air?
I transferred them to a ground unit. I transferred patient care to those ground units, and I actually don't know if they ended up flying them from some other location or not.
And I believe you told us that all occurred on Highway 198. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. This is all in the middle of the highway, just north of that intersection with that county road.
Just north of the intersection of 1650.
Yes, ma'am.
And was that the end of your involvement that day, or did you, after you finished, did you move to another scene?
No, ma'am. I ended up moving to another location. At some point during this, as I'm caring for these people, several of the officers left the scene for a report of another vehicle that was supposedly involved. But myself and 1 or 2 other deputies stayed on scene. But after I had transferred care of the patients, I did leave and go to another residence where a vehicle that had been involved was at.
So while you were on scene on 198, did something happen that drew the other officer's attention to another vehicle?
My understanding was a silver or light colored pickup that matched the description of another involved vehicle appeared visible to officers on the scene, and several of them left and as far as I understand, pursued that vehicle.
And so you're on 198. Some of the other officers see a silver or light colored pickup truck. They leave to go check that truck's involvement. Where did you go to after you finished on 198?
After I had transferred the patients and the scene was being just investigated, we were talking about moving the cars. There was a report of a car that had pulled up in a private residence, I believe to the east of where we were at. And that individual was claiming she had been involved in a shooting. And I was pretty much the only one available to leave the scene at the time. So I went to that scene to make contact and see what was going on there.
So you leave 198. you go to a location east of there. And what did you find when you arrived at that location?
So this was just a regular single-family residence. It's somewhat rural. There were a few other houses within view, but there was a white Mustang parked in the driveway. There was a female standing outside in the yard, and there were the homeowner, the occupants of the house were standing outside as well as I pulled up.
And did you engage with the female to determine what's going on?
I did. She was fairly distraught, and as I walked up and looked at the car, there were bullet holes visible from the exterior of the car as I approached her. And so I asked her if she had been injured or wounded in any way. I identified myself as a paramedic to her. She said she was not, but I was concerned that with her emotional state, she might not realize that she was injured. But I did make contact with her and asked for her identification and talked to her, made sure she was okay. She didn't want an ambulance to come. And then I made contact with the homeowners to ask, what the situation was.
Do you recall anything, Officer Hudgens, about the location of the bullet holes in this white Mustang?
Yes, ma'am. There was a one that stood out particular to me went in this is a Mustang with a regular driver's side window and then a small window behind that B pillar. And there was a bullet hole in that small window, and you could see through that bullet hole another entry and exit into the headrest of that vehicle. And I was curious as to how that managed to miss her, because it came in the headrest and out the front corner of the headrest and embedded in the passenger door. So
And she was she the only occupant of that vehicle?
she at that residence, yes, ma'am.
So, and was the bullet hole that went through the headrest on the driver's side or passenger side?
The bullet hole was in the driver's side window through the driver's headrest and embedded in the passenger door on the interior.
Somehow it missed her, or it missed whoever was driving.
Somehow.
So what else occurred there after you engaged the female and examined the Mustang?
I believe I might have offered her a bottle of water, but we were going to wait for some other officers to come. And as I was looking at these bullet holes, I asked her if I could look inside her car for additional bullet holes. There was another one in the rearmost pillar of the vehicle that didn't appear to have gone inside, and there was another one in the trunk. I opened the driver's door of the vehicle to look at the hole in the headrest, and as I did, I noted that there was some things in the back seat that kind of caught my attention. There was a vacuum sealer. There was some bundled currency in a bag. There were dryer sheets stuck in all the vents of the car to commonly used to cover scent. So at that point, I felt that I was transitioning from a investigation of these bullet holes to a possible narcotics investigation. So I closed the door of the car and waited till we could get a written consent to search the vehicle. Past that.
So vacuum sealer, what significance does that have?
There were I believe some cooking, but there's some white powder in the back and the vacuum sealer, and all those in combination are commonly used to package and transport narcotics.
So you, at that point, realized the situation was changing. Close up the car, wait for written consent. What happened next?
I pretty much stayed outside and visited with the female, Miss Ross, until the arrival of another deputy who had a written consent to search form with him, because I did not, and we were filling that out. And then I just maintained conversation with her and secured the scene until the arrival of Deputy Wheeler, who was a supervisor to me at the time.
After Deputy Wheeler is finished, everybody leaves there. Does that end your involvement with this case?
Ma'am, I actually left that scene prior to the vehicle being towed back to the sheriff's department. Yes.
And that was the end of your involvement.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass this witness around.
Mr. Whitener, please.
Thank you. Officer Hudgens, people that you were dealing with, about how old were they?
The patients that I was in with, sir, I would have said mid-30s to early 40s.
35 to 42, be a good range.
I would agree. That's possible.
You never had any actual contact with the client, did you?
No, sir.
And you stopped doing everything because these people had items in their car to make you think that they were involved with drugs. Is that correct?
I just didn't feel that her verbal consent to search for bullet fragments allowed me to search for anything other than bullet fragments, so I stopped.
But you saw something that made you think that.
Yes, sir.
But you don't actually remember the names of these people.
I did not identify them. I asked their name as I was treating them just so I could have a rapport with them, but I didn't identify them for my report until later after I asked everybody who they were. Other than Ms. Ross.
That's great.
Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you, officer. You can step down.
I give you finally excuse your.
Any objection to T under subpoena at all? You're free to go. State has any additional witnesses?
David Wheeler, Your Honor.
Raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear that the testimony you give to the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Yes, sir. What's your step? Have a seat, same instructions that I gave Officer Preston. Just speak up loudly and clearly and one at a time so we can take down a clear record. If you hear a loud noise or emergency vehicle while you're testifying, just stop, let that just go by, and then if the attorney's objecting to your testimony, just stop testifying. The court will address that. That's great.
Sir, would you state your name for our record, please?
David Wheeler.
How are you currently employed?
I'm an investigator for the Van Zant County Sheriff's Office.
Back in July of 2020, how were you employed?
I was an investigator for the Van Zant County Sheriff's Office.
And on both of those occasions, today and back then, were you a certified peace officer in the state of Texas?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to direct your attention also to July the 8th of 2020 and ask you if you recall being involved in an incident near the intersection of highways 198 and FM 1651 here in Van Zant County.
Yes, ma'am.
How did you first learn of that?
The radio traffic from an Maybank officer had pulled up on the scene of a shooting.
And once you heard that radio traffic, what did you do?
I got in my department issued vehicle and went to that location.
Now, we heard Officer Hudgens testify about a location on 198 where a small black sedan was. Did you go to that location or to a different one?
I went to that location.
While you were at that location, did anything attract your attention that caused you to go to a different location?
I was only at the location of 198 for a brief minute. I walked up to speak with Trooper Fagley, which was speaking to one of the victims, and he turned and pointed at a grayish silver Chevy pickup and said that was the person that shot him. And we got in our vehicles and began to pursue the vehicle.
So if I understood you correctly, while you're there, one of the two people who's been shot says, that's the truck.
Yes, ma'am.
So you got in your vehicle. Did you attempt to stop that gray or silver Chevy truck?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was it going at that time?
It was going, I guess that would be south on 1651.
And how long did you successfully stop the vehicle?
Trooper Fagley successfully stopped the vehicle after a short pursuit where the vehicle failed to stop.
Was Trooper Fagley in his marked black and white?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you in a marked unit or an unmarked unit?
I was in an unmarked unit.
So Trooper Fagley gets the Chevy truck stopped. What happens next?
We performed a felony takedown where we extracted the people from two occupants from the vehicle in a safe manner so nobody would be hurt.
Felony takedown, guns drawn?
Yes, ma'am.
And how many occupants were in the Chevy truck?
There was two.
Do you recall who the driver of that vehicle was?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was that?
Mr. I can't remember his last name.
Do you see him in the courtroom?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you identify him by what he's wearing?
Black jacket, white shirt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect he's identified the defendant.
Record will reflect that this witness has identified the defendant in a
And when you made contact with the driver of that vehicle, what did you find?
I made contact with the passenger of the vehicle. We got, I believe, Trooper Fagley and Sergeant McGuire got the driver out or detained the driver, and I detained the passenger. And there was, you, you could plain view see that there was a pistol in the truck. And if I remember correctly, you could see there was a 50-round drum magazine for the pistol also laying in the truck in plain view.
Your may I have just a moment? Hey, first witness, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm gonna hand you a box that's marked 25406. With some writing on the front. Are you able to identify that?
Yes, ma'am.
And would you open that box for us? This box has a series of entries on the front.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it fair to describe that as a chain of custody?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recognize the contents of this box?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, is it in the same condition as it was on July the 8th of 2020? When it was seized from that truck?
Yes, ma'am. It appears to be.
And are you the first person on that chain of custody who put it into evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, will offer State's Exhibit 1 in this cause.
Any objections, Your Honor? You want to approach the city exam? There being no objection, State's Exhibit 1 is submitted.
So Sergeant Wheeler, can you tell us what that is?
That is a Glock semi-automatic pistol.
On July the 8th of 2020, how old did a person have to be to legally possess that, if you know?
21, I believe.
And is there also a magazine in that box?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that magazine also seized from the silver colored Chevy pickup?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there another magazine seized from the silver colored Chevy pickup?
Yes, ma'am, there was.
And can you describe that for us?
It's a round drum magazine. It's got the top of the drum magazine sticks out so it fits the pistol like a regular magazine does. Just capable of holding more rounds.
So, and did that magazine fit that pistol?
Yes, ma'am.
Was it in it at the time you seized it?
I don't recall if it was in it then or not.
And would that magazine allow that pistol then to fire 50 rounds consecutively, uninterrupted?
Yes, ma'am.
So once was there anything else found in the truck to the best of your recollection, that would be associated with drug trafficking?
I believe once it was determined and they were taken into custody, Trooper Fagley started his inventory of the vehicle and there was a clear baggie with a white substance in there. I believe it to be cocaine. I believe there were some pills in there also.
And about how big, like gallon baggie, sandwich baggie, smaller than a sandwich baggie?
This was a smaller baggie.
So after the vehicle was interviewed, where did you go to next?
I went to Deputy Hudgens' location where the white Mustang was.
And what did you find there?
Deputy Hudgens showed me the bullet holes in the vehicle. And I spoke with the homeowner, and the homeowner had stated that Ms. Ross had went inside the house to use the restroom. So I asked if I could go in there to see if anything had been hidden in the restroom or anything, and search that immediate area, and they gave me consent to search that, and I didn't find anything in there at that point.
So this homeowner, was that someone that Miss Ross knew?
No, ma'am.
So you searched the restroom, didn't find anything that had been discarded or disposed of?
Yes, ma'am.
Um, you were in the courtroom, you heard Deputy Hudgens describe the location of the various bullet holes in the Mustang. Do you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
What was Miss Ross's demeanor?
She was very shaken and disturbed about the situation that just happened.
Did she tell you what had gone on?
I believe she said they were looking for some property to buy.
So after you finished at that location, where did you go next?
After that, I returned to the sheriff's office.
Later, did you have other involvement in this case?
Yes, ma'am. I believe after the initial interview with the suspect there, he had told one of the investigators that he threw out an ounce of cocaine that they were supposed to sell Miss Ross and the other two victims.
Did you and other officers make an attempt to find that cocaine?
Yes, ma'am.
Um, Tell me about that.
We drove up and down 1651 for an hour or so, maybe, looking at possible locations where he said he threw it out, that he thought that might have been where it was, but we were unable to find anything.
And was he with y'all doing that?
Yes, ma'am.
And you never found the ounce of cocaine?
No, ma'am.
Were you involved in that interview of him that night?
No, ma'am.
So after you finished with the looking for the cocaine that you don't find, did you have any other involvement in this case?
No, ma'am.
How much does, in 2020, how much did an ounce of cocaine sell for?
It depends on the area you're in, where you're getting it from, how deeply embedded you are in the drug trafficking organization. You get anywhere from $400 to $1,000.
$400 to $1,000.
Yes, ma'am.
How much, same time period, 2020, how much would a kilo of cocaine sold for?
17 to 22,000.
Someone is, you know what the word front means?
Yes, ma'am.
What does the word front mean in the drug trade?
It's where your supplier, dealer, whatever, gives you a certain amount of narcotics to go sell without you actually paying for it to begin with. You bring the money back to them after you've sold the product.
So if a person is fronted a kilo of cocaine and they don't come back with either the cocaine or the money, in the drug trade, are they generally in trouble?
There's probably going to be some.
First out. So. Right now, would you get from speculation?
Sustain.
How long have you been a narcotics officer, sir?
I believe since 2016.
In your time as a narcotics officer, have you done undercover deals, supervised CI deals, become familiar with transactions involving a kilo or more of cocaine?
Yes, ma'am.
One time or many times?
It's several times.
And have you become familiar with the general price ranges, operations, and consequences of drug dealing in East Texas?
Yes, ma'am.
Based on your experience, if a person is fronted a kilo of cocaine,
Your Honor, once again, I find this irrelevant, this particular situation, because we're coming up with hypotheticals.
Or what's the purpose of your line of question?
the purpose of the line of questioning, Judge, is one of the things at issue here is whether this was in fact a robbery from the beginning or a real drug deal. Either one is bad, but as the testimony develops, I think the court will see that this defendant, when he subsequently attempted to cooperate with law enforcement, he changed his story a couple of times. And no matter which story it is, none of them are consistent with it being a drug deal. And one of the factors that plays into that is that if in fact it were a drug deal and he lost the drugs and didn't get the money, there would have been some consequence to him.
Your Honor, this is total speculation. It's not anything. Let's say and try to find a different story. As I said, we are pleading guilty to everything sought that way. That's what we're here.
Court's gonna overrule the objection. And I'm gonna allow this investigator to testify regarding the experience that he has gained and developed as a law enforcement officer in the area of narcotics investigations.
So based on this experience that you've described for us, Sergeant Wheeler, if a person were fronted a kilo of cocaine and they did not come back to their source with either the money or the cocaine, would there generally be a consequence to them?
Yes, ma'am.
Could it possibly be an exception to that if their source was a family member or someone they were close to?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, it's almost getting to the point bizarre. This has nothing to do with what we are here to plead guilty for. Now we're trying to speculate sources.
I'll move on, Judge.
I'll also stand the objection.
Thank you, Officer Sergeant Wheeler. I pass for this room.
Mr. Williams.
Sergeant Wheeler, did you ever have an opportunity to interview my client, Jan?
No, sir.
So you don't know anything about whether there was consistency or inconsistency in the story, is that correct?
I couldn't tell you what he said or didn't say, no, sir.
The people that you did deal with, the people from Tennessee, what age frame would you put these people in?
I couldn't tell you on the two male victims. I seen one of them for a brief second and that was it.
Much older though than 17-year-old,
They looked older, yes, sir.
say, oh, not talking about in the 20s,
No, he looked older than that, mid-30s or so.
mid-30s.
That was the one that was up standing in the road walking around. The other one I did not see at all.
Did any of these people wind up giving you a story that you don't believe?
I didn't speak to them.
Talking about the three people from Tennessee.
I spoke briefly to the female for a very brief second, but that was it. I never spoke to the male subjects.
She wind up telling you that they were just there to look at property or something.
Yes, sir.
Sir, any further questions?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thanks, sir. You may step down once you're done.
You want to leave this right here?
Yes, so, no, he doesn't, we'll take that, Yes.
And may he be finally excused, Your Honor?
Any objection to Sergeant Wheeler being finally excused? No, you're excused, sir. State calling any additional witnesses.
Bob Felton, Your Honor?
Skelton. Okay, Kelvin, raise your right hand. Sir, do you swear that the testimony you give to the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Same instructions I gave the other ones. Okay. Very good.
Thank you, Judge. Sir, would you state your name for our record?
Bob Keltner.
And how are you currently employed?
I'm the lieutenant supervising CID with the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Office.
How are you employed in July the 8th of 2020?
I was a sergeant investigator assigned to the property crimes unit.
On both of those occasions, today and July the 8th of 2020, were you a certified peace officer in the state of Texas?
I am.
Just back on here.
That better?
On July the 8th of 2020, did you receive a call or information that dispatched you to a location near the intersection of Highway 198 and FM 1651 in Van Zandt County?
I did. I overheard radio traffic and self-initiated.
And where did you go to when you went to that area? Which location?
198, just several yards north of 1651.
Is that where Deputy Hudgens was?
I believe Deputy Hudgens had already departed by the time I arrived. Deputy Jason Hall was still on location holding the scene.
And did something happen while you were there on 198 that caused you to go to another location?
My partner, Sergeant Ricky Willis, had received information that the actual shooting had occurred on 1651.
So did you leave 198 and go to 1651?
I did.
And what was the location on 1651?
So there's a Baptist church there, roughly situated north and south with a parking lot that was pea gravel and or asphalt covered by pea gravel to the east side of the church.
Big church, small church?
I'd say a small church.
When you arrived at that church on 1651, were other officers already there?
Sergeant Ricky Willis had pulled up there, yes.
And when you arrived there, what, if anything, did you find that caught your attention?
So we began to process the scene. There were numerous items of interest and or evidence. So we processed that scene to create. We took measurements, we took photographs, we kept a log, we recovered evidence, and then submitted that evidence for storage.
Did you find any spent shell casings there?
I did.
And do you recall what caliber they were?
It doesn't look like I noted it in my report.
Do you recall whether they were all the same caliber or whether you found different calibers?
They were all the same.
About how long did you spend out there processing the scene?
I would say between an hour and 2 hours.
What were was your next task with regard to this case after you completed processing that scene?
As I recall, I returned to the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Office.
And what did you do there?
I've set about to assist the other investigators in interviewing witnesses and suspects.
Did you have occasion to interview the defendant, Janice Spino?
I did sit in on that interview, yes.
Did you conduct the interview or just observe the interview?
I primarily observed the interview.
And did Mr. Espino give you his version of what had happened at the church on 1651?
I believe I heard that, yes.
Do you recall what he said?
So yes and no, and I hate to be I'm not being wishy-washy. It's just that I wasn't the lead there, so I didn't write up that portion of the interview. But I recall the gist of what was said. Please don't quote me word for word though. But basically he had indicated that he was meeting these folks from Tennessee. I don't recall how he specifically described them. He had indicated that he had met them through the electronic service provider Snapchat, a telephone app platform, social media, that they'd come there so that he could sell them cocaine.
And during that interview, did he tell you how much cocaine was supposedly in this deal?
He indicated to me an ounce.
Did he admit to you that he had shot the two men?
Yes, he said that he had shot them, yes.
Did he say anything as to why he had shot them?
Well, he had indicated that the other man had a gun, Mr. Ellison. And that, I mean, his indication is that he was trying to protect himself somehow.
So now he's given you information in this interview that, well, did he say what he did with the ounce of cocaine that he purportedly brought to the deal?
Well, he claimed that he threw it out the window as he was fleeing from the scene.
And he's also claimed that Mr. Ellison had a gun and he was scared and that's why he fired.
That is what he said, or something to that effect.
So with that information, what do you do?
So we gained Mr. Espino, if I'm saying that correctly, his cooperation in returning to the scene and west of there where he actually rode with me. We attempted to retrace his flight from the scene, and we investigated numerous, if not miles, of ditch and roadway where he had indicated it was possible that he had thrown the cocaine out.
So is this still that same day, the 8th?
Yeah, that was that not, well, it may have been the next morning around between midnight and 1 or 2 a.m. We spent a significant amount of time leading up to that, forming interviews. The next day, the 9th in the morning, as I recall, I'm sorry, it was the 14th. Sometime later, I returned to that area during the daylight and walked the ditches, also looking for a firearm from Hobson and Ellison's vehicle.
So that night, after he gives the information that there's a missing ounce of cocaine, y'all take him, put him in a car, have him show you where to go.
Mhm.
And you can't find an ounce of cocaine.
That's correct. We cannot.
And then on the 14th, knowing that there's a missing gun, according to him, and possibly an ounce of cocaine. You went back out and looked in the daylight. And did you find anything then?
I did not.
Was there ever a gun found in either the small black sedan or the Mustang?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And was there money found in the Mustang?
There was.
Do you recall how much?
I believe it was in excess of $20,000 US currency.
Where was that money, if you remember?
I believe that I was informed it was in the back seat or the back floorboard of the Mustang.
Did you have occasion to interview either Mr. Ellison or Mr. Hobson?
I did not.
Did you have occasion to interview Christina Ross
I did
that night?
that night.
On that night, was Ms. Ross truthful with you?
No, she was not.
What was her story on that night?
She had indicated that that Mr. Ellison had been raised in the country and that they had traveled from Memphis, Tennessee to the Athens, Texas area to look at property.
Did you believe that then?
Not at all. It was pretty far-fetched. It also was pretty strange that they brought a uninvolved third party in a separate car to take a joyride in the country.
And that would have been Mr. Hobson.
That is correct.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Mr. White, your witness.
Y'all went out in an attempt to try to find cocaine and a gun many times.
Well, more than once, yes.
And sometimes at night.
Yes, the initial was at night.
And I'm sure that's fairly difficult to look for something like this at night.
Which is why we had were assisted by Mr. Espino.
An ounce of cocaine doesn't take up a lot of space, really doesn't.
I wouldn't think so, no.
Or were you just really shocked if y'all couldn't find it on the side of the road? 198 from somebody who's unfamiliar with it.
Well, I found it frustrating that we didn't find it.
But you're not shocked, were you?
Not really, but surprised that we didn't find it.
You did go out though in an attempt to see if there was a gun, right?
I did.
It's not uncommon for there to be two people who have guns in these types of situations.
Well, frankly, I'm not a narcotics investigator, so I'd be speculating, but
Go ahead and speculate.
well, I mean, I think that it's reasonable that if you're carrying that kind of money, that's possible. However, I think that there's some extenuating circumstances on the part of Mr. Ellison as to why he would not be carrying a weapon.
In this type of situation, it's not out of the ordinary. Somebody maybe thinks somebody in this position might have a gun because
Well,
we both handled these type of cases. That wouldn't be shocking, would it?
it would not be shocking.
It wouldn't be surprised if somebody gets scared, even if they don't see it.
Okay, I apologize. Can you say?
It would not be totally shocking to you either that somebody would be scared that someone had a gun, even if they didn't see it in this type of situation. Honestly.
No, it wouldn't necessarily be shocking.
That's perfect.
It's great.
No more questions, Judge.
Thank you.
Let's get a Crawford and move on. Christopher Ray Rodney, swear that the testimony you give before today will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Jesse?
And Judge, before he begins, I'll apologize on his behalf for his tire today. Unfortunately, Mr. Crawford usually dresses up for court as he should. We received this pre-sentence report late middle of the afternoon yesterday. It wasn't until this morning that I recognized that I needed Mr. Crawford in order to establish some facts that were brought out, to counter some facts that were brought out in the PSI. So I apologize on his behalf.
I understand that, no apology.
Sir, would you state your name for us, please?
William Crawford
And Mr. Crawford, how are you employed?
with the District Attorney's Office here in Canton, Van Zandt County,
And how long have you been so employed?
since 2015.
You are an investigator, is that right?
Correct.
Are you a certified peace officer in the state of Texas?
I am.
So, Investigator Crawford, as a part of the DA's office handling of this case, did I ask you to assist in a debriefing of Mr. Jan Espino?
You did.
And that was back in March of 22, is that correct?
March 15th, 2022,
Where did that take place?
at our office in the conference room.
And who all was present for that?
It was you, me, Mr. White, and Jan Espinino.
And this morning, did I ask you to review the recording of that so that to prepare to testify today?
You did.
So there's just a couple things in that that I would like to ask you about. First of all, when Mr. Espino came in and did that debriefing with us, was he instructed that he needed to be truthful?
He was.
And during that debriefing, did he in fact tell you that he was on July the 8th of 2020 involved in a drug deal?
Yes.
And was he asked about what type and quantity of drug the transaction was for?
He was.
And what was his response to that?
1 kilo of cocaine.
And was he asked what he did with that kilo of cocaine?
He was.
And what was his response to that?
That after the incident that occurred at the church, the kilo was in a green backpack, and when everything happened and they took off, he dispersed it by opening up the packaging on the side of the road.
And what did he do with the green backpack after he opened the packaging on the side of the road?
He put it in the back of the truck.
During this debriefing, did Mr. Espino admit that he had in fact shot at the other individuals?
He did.
Did he say why or what prompted him to shoot at the other individuals?
He did.
What did he say?
He said that as he was over at the vehicle with Mr. Ellison, he was looking into the bag, leaning over, looking into the bag, the product that he had brought, and that Mr. Ellison was up close to him, maybe nudging or pushing at him, that Mr. Ellison was a big guy. He thought he was on dope or high, intoxicated of some sort. And he just felt that he was going to be robbed.
Did he mention to us seeing a gun in Mr. Ellison's hand, on Mr. Ellison or near Mr. Ellison, accessible to Mr. Ellison?
He did not mention that. He did say that he did not have a gun.
He said he did not have a gun.
Correct.
Did he claim that he was ever shot at, fired at?
He did
by
not.
any others?
He did not.
Did Mr. Espino indicate when they were standing looking in the bag, um, what Mr. Ellison was explaining to him?
Do not recall.
Do you recall him talking about a conversation about how Mr. Ellison concealed the money when he traveled like this?
I do.
What was that?
It was sugar.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass it.
That's right. Thanks, sir. They were calling any additional witnesses.
One more, Your Honor. Christina Ross.
Christina Ross, is she outside? Mr. Ross, if you'll raise your right hand. Ma'am, do you swear that the testimony you give to the court today would be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? What's your step? Have a seat. Counsel, can you approach? Counsel, can you approach? Mr. White. All right, Mr. Ross, I'm gonna give you some instructions on your testimony.
Yes, sir.
While you are testifying, please speak up loudly and clearly. You don't have to lean into the microphone, just project your voice, okay? During the testimony, if the attorneys object, we'll just stop testifying, then the court will entertain their objection, and I'll let you know. You can continue or not. Also, if during your testimony, a loud vehicle or emergency vehicle passes by the courthouse, just stop testifying so you can hear what you have to say. Lastly, I do want to advise you as to your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination that's guaranteed to you by the United States and Texas constitutions. You are an indicted individual in this court at cause number CO 21-143. Understand that you are being called as a witness today on behalf of the state of Texas to give testimony. You are to understand that you do have the right to not testify as to anything that may be incriminating to you.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, you can waive that right. And in this case, your case, which you already got, you have the assistance of counsel, Mr. Shaw, National Leader, who's present in the court here today. So at any time you feel like you need to discuss your answers or proposed answers with your attorney, if you have any concern about that, you could just notify the court by turning and telling me that you wish to speak with your attorney, at which time the court will take a short break to allow Mr. Burleer to get legal counsel so that you can determine whether or not you want to waive your Fifth Amendment right. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions about that?
No, I do not.
It's great.
Thank you, Judge. Ma'am, would you go ahead and state your name for our record?
Christina Ross.
Ms. Ross, we've heard some testimony that indicates you're from Tennessee. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
What part?
Jackson.
Had you, prior to all these events, had you lived there most all your life?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you employed at the time?
No, ma'am.
So, Ms. Ross, I want to talk to you about July the 8th of 2020. Do you remember that date?
Yes, ma'am. Just like it was yesterday.
So let's back up just a little bit and talk about what led up to that date. Tell me, back in 2020, who Marcos Ellison was to you.
Marcus Ellison was my boyfriend at the time.
And how long had you known Marcos?
I've actually known Marcus like over 10 years.
How long had y'all been seeing each other?
Approximately like 2 years, 2.5 years at the time.
Did Marcus do a lot of traveling?
Yes, ma'am.
When he traveled, did you go with him?
Yes, ma'am.
At some point, did you learn what the purpose of Marcus's travel was?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And what was that purpose?
To purchase narcotics.
I'm sorry?
To purchase narcotics.
Was there someone else who traveled with you and Marcus when Marcus was purchasing narcotics?
On that particular day, yes, ma'am.
Did that happen every time? Part of the time? Was this the first time?
This actually was the first time.
So, as Marcus's girlfriend, were you involved in any of the planning that went into these trips?
No, ma'am.
How did it come about that you found out that y'all were traveling to East Texas?
He had been planning a trip for a while, but he just called me up one day and was like, well, you know, the deal or whatever finally went through. He said, be ready at a certain time, and I was ready, and we left.
Is this an area that y'all had ever traveled to together before?
No, ma'am. I've never been to Texas.
So when you left Tennessee, headed to Texas, what did you know?
I pretty much knew that we were taking a trip. We were meeting up with somebody, and that's pretty much it.
Who all left Tennessee with you?
It was me, Mr. Ellison, and Mr. Hobson.
Is that Mario Hobson?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know Mr. Hobson before this?
Yes, ma'am.
Had he ever traveled with y'all before?
No.
What were y'all traveling in the same car?
Yes, ma'am.
And what car was that?
The Ford Mustang.
White Mustang, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know whether or not Mr. Ellison had any money with him to purchase the narcotics?
No, ma'am.
Traveling with Mr. Ellison, as you did you learn where he normally kept money when he had money?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was that?
He usually would keep money in bags of sugar.
Okay.
Sealed bags of sugar.
Okay. So like the bag that it comes in at the store or?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Like he would reseal the bag as if
It was just purchased.
Okay. And so on this particular occasion in the white Mustang, did you see a bag of sugar in the car or anything?
No, ma'am, at that present time, I didn't.
The day that all this happened, is that the same day that y'all got to East Texas, or did you get here before that?
We got here the night prior. So it was like July the 7th.
So when you got here on July the 7th, where did you go?
When we got here on July the 7th, it had gotten late. We went to the Best Western in Athens.
And y'all are all three still in the white Mustang at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
So did you spend the night at the Best Western in Athens?
We did.
Okay. And what happened the next day?
The next day, they particularly got up and left early. They left me there. I got up and showered and we left. We left the hotel.
So you said they got up and left first?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know where they went?
I do not.
When they came back, were they still in the Mustang?
Yes, ma'am.
So then you got up, showered, they come back, then what happened?
After that, like I wanted to go swimming. Mr. Ellison told me no. He said, come ride with me. So that's what I did. So we rode.
Do you know where you were going?
At that particular time, no, but I realized once we got there, we rode to get a rental car.
To where?
To get a rental car?
To get a rental car.
Yes, ma'am.
And did you guys in fact get a rental car?
We did.
What did it look like?
It was either, I want to say it was dark blue or black. It was a Hyundai 4-door.
Little car?
Yes, ma'am. Like a compact car.
And what was the purpose, if you know, in getting a rental car?
Okay, the purpose for the rental car was to, for Mr. Hobson to take the narcotics back to Tennessee.
Was he gonna ride by himself? Were you gonna ride with him? How was that supposed to work?
Okay, the arrangement was Mr. Hobson was supposed to drive the narcotics back. Me and Marcus were gonna stay in Texas, like to, go out to eat and different stuff like that.
So after you get the rental car, do you know where you went to get the rental car?
No, ma'am, I can't remember at this time.
So after you get the rental car, then what happens?
Okay, once we get the rental car, we rode around and we went to a distinct location after this point.
So I want to jump ahead just for a minute.
Yes,
okay?
ma'am.
We're going to come back to there. After all this happened and you got arrested, were you honest with the police?
To start off, I did. I lied and told them the reason for me being here was for, property management, trying to protect Mr. Ellison. But I initially told the truth because that's how I am. I'm a truthful person. So,
So you lied at first,
yes, ma'am.
but then you came around and told the truth.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's go back. How was the location determined where this transaction was going to take place?
The location was determined by Marcus was coinciding, with Mr. Esposito about the location.
Did you know at this point that Marcus had money with him?
No, ma'am.
So Marcus and Mr. Espino were determining the location.
Yes, ma'am.
Who was in which cars and who was driving?
At this point in time, Mario was in the Hyundai. Me and Marcus we were in the Mustang.
And who was driving?
He was driving
He was
at
driving.
this time. Yes, ma'am.
And where did y'all stop?
Well, we actually had stopped like 3 times. The first time we stopped, we went to a location. It looked kind of sketchy. So we left there and we initially ended up meeting at a church
Did you meet at the church one time or more than one time?
more than one time.
So let's start with the first time you met at the church.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the car arrangement still the same? Mario in the Hyundai, you and Marcos with Marcus driving?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So take me step by step what happens at the first meeting at the church.
Okay, the first meeting at the church, it was me and Marcus in one car. Mario was to my left, and then behind us was Mr. Exposito in his truck.
And is that the way y'all pulled into the church?
Yes, ma'am. We all were faced towards the road.
So you turned around and y'all were faced towards the road.
Yes, ma'am.
And was there conversation between anybody?
Mr. Exposito and Mr. Ellison, they were talking amongst each other.
In the cars or out of the cars?
They were outside the car.
Were they the only two outside the cars?
Yes, ma'am. It was just Mr. Exposito and Mr. Ellison. They were talking to each other.
Did they have anything in their hands showing each other anything at that point?
Okay, initially, they were talking. He introduced me to Mr. Exposito, and that's when Mr. Ellison popped out with the money and the sugar.
So at that point, are you still sitting in the car,
Yes, ma'am. I was sitting on the passenger side.
passenger side? And where is Mr. Ellison? Is he in the car or
He
standing out?
was standing outside the car.
And does he get the sugar out of the car himself?
Yes, ma'am. He got the sugar out. He busted it open and pulled the money out the sugar.
What happened after that?
After that, him and Mr. Exposito, they were talking, and he showed him, the wad of money that he had took out the sugar. And by this time, sugar had wasted, like it was in the parking lot, in the back seat of the car, and on the passenger side.
Okay, okay. So the sugar bag wasn't holding well, it was spilling out,
Right.
but Mr. Ellison showed Mr. Espino the money.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see that happen?
Yes, ma'am.
Then what was next?
And then they coincided. They were just still talking, and then he didn't have what he initially wanted from Mr. Exposito. He didn't have it. So we were supposed to meet back up with him like a little while after.
So Mr. Espino didn't have the cocaine?
No, ma'am.
Did you know at that point what Mr. Ellison was there to buy?
Yes, ma'am.
So when he finds out that Mr. Espino doesn't have it, then what happens?
They had a conversation, and we were supposed to meet him back at the church.
How long later, do you know?
It was probably it wasn't too long. I'll say about 20-25 minutes.
So what did y'all do in that 20 or 25 minutes?
We just rode up and down that same particular road,
The road the church was on or a different one?
the same road the church was on.
Now, up until this point, had you seen on this day, had you seen either Mr. Ellison or Mr. Hobson with a gun?
No, ma'am.
On other trips with Marcus, had you ever seen him have a gun?
No.
Anytime, had you ever seen him have a gun?
No, ma'am.
So y'all ride around for about 20 minutes. And then do you go back to the same church?
Yes, ma'am. We went back to the same exact church, and we all parked the same exact way.
And describe this church for me, Mr. Ross.
It's like it was a white church. It's really sitting like off in a field by itself, and it's got like the parking lot is like rocks and dust.
Is it a little church?
Yes, ma'am.
Little kind of gray cinder block building?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you say you park the same way, who is closest to the road? Which cars are closest to the road?
All right, the white Mustang will be here and Mario is still to the left and Mr. Exposino was behind.
Behind you,
We all parked the same exact way.
facing the road again?
Yes, ma'am.
So what happens on this second stop at the church? Does anyone get out of cars?
Okay, by this time, the second trip, me and Marcus we switched.
Okay.
So I got in the driver's seat and he was on the passenger side. He got out the car and proceeded to go and talk to Mr. Esposito.
At Mr. Espino's truck or somewhere else?
They were standing right in front of his truck, like behind the Mustang and in front of his truck.
Did Mr. Ellison take the money with him when he went to talk to Mr. Espino?
No, ma'am, he did not.
So where's the money at this point
The money was in the back seat.
of the Mustang?
Yes, ma'am.
And when Mr. Ellison went back to talk to Mr. Espino, did Mr. Espino have anything in his hand?
At that present time, I seen nothing in his hand at that time. Like they kind of got out of the truck kind of slow.
Did you ever see Mr. Espino with a green backpack?
No, ma'am. I seen them with the bag, but it wasn't green.
And were you watching what was going on or were you just doing your own thing?
I was watching.
So while you're watching them in front of the truck, what do you see next?
Okay, so I'm looking in the driver's side rearview mirror. Both mirrors I'm watching. I see Mr. Pizzino, another guy, and Mr. Ellison. They all three standing there. So the other guy, he had a bag. Mr. Ellison goes to open up the bag, and I see Mr. Exposino shoot him.
Okay. So the other guy, was he also from the silver truck?
Yes, ma'am, he was.
So he has a bag. And Mr. Ellison looks in that bag. And
Yes, ma'am.
as Mr. Ellison looks in that bag, what happens?
Jan shoots him.
Once or more than once?
More than once.
What does Mr. Ellison do?
Mr. Ellison, he falls, he hits the ground. And by this time, once he hits the ground, I was just in shock. So I drove off because I didn't want to be shot too.
Were there any other shots fired other than the ones that hit Mr. Ellison?
Yes, ma'am. Once Mr. Ellison was shot, he shot at me as I was pulling off. And I'm still watching him from the rearview mirror and he jumps in his truck and, we riding down the road and he's shooting.
So he shoots Mr. Ellison. Does Mr. Hobson get shot?
I have no acknowledgement of him getting shot because by this time I was scared, so I drove off.
So there's shots fired at the church.
Yes, ma'am.
You see Mr. Ellison fall. You take off. What does the gray truck do when you take off?
When I take off, I'm constantly looking in the rearview mirror and I'm watching him chase me and shoot.
What did the gun look like that he was shooting at you with?
At the time, it looked like a small caliber gun. I'm not really familiar with guns, but it looked like a small caliber gun.
Did you see anything unusual about it?
No, ma'am.
Could you tell if the Mustang, you were in the Mustang, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell if it was getting hit by any of these bullets?
Yes, ma'am. Like, I heard the gunshots. I never forget it. And like, I felt like something going past my head as I'm riding. So I just tried to get away. That's all I knew.
Where did you go?
I actually drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. And I seen him behind me following me. So I accelerated and I ended up somewhere where I didn't know.
What'd you do when you got there?
Um, it's like I couldn't, it's like the car had been shot up, so it's like the car wouldn't even go as fast as it was going. So I proceeded to pull over to a house. I pulled up, I held my hands up and I blew the horn. And this nice lady, she came out to help me.
Later, did the police get there?
Yes, ma'am.
What were you thinking when you drove out of that parking lot?
I was scared. And, to run from somebody don't know if you're gonna live or die, like that's a hard pill to swallow. And I was by myself.
You already told us that you were not truthful with the police that day.
Yes, ma'am.
Since then, after you started cooperating with us, has that caused you some issues in Tennessee?
Um, well, during the process of the whole thing happening, like I lost my kids, my job, I lost my house, my cars, like everything. So
Where were you working when this happened?
I worked at well prior to that, because I took leave, I was working at a staffing agency. I was HR over accounts. So
And you don't have to say what town, but have you actually moved now?
yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ellison's in jail now, but before he was in jail, were you after this incident, before he went to jail, were you still in contact with him?
No, ma'am.
One more thing, Ms. Ross. You, and this is just something that we have to disclose through the defense lawyers. You have been arrested before, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You have some convictions for, I think it was misdemeanor theft, maybe 2 convictions,
Yes, ma'am.
and 1 for misdemeanor marijuana, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Are those the only convictions you have?
Yes, ma'am.
When you first made the decision to cooperate in this case, did you know what I was going to recommend, or what the DA's office was going to recommend that your punishment be?
No, ma'am.
Did we tell you that we would take into consideration your cooperation?
Yes, ma'am.
And now that Mr. Ellison and Mr. Hobson's cases are done, and once we knew that this was going to be an open plea, did we finalize your plea agreement?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it your intention today to plead guilty to a state jail felony offense?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll pass the witness, Judge.
Mr. Whitehead, please.
Ms. Ross, you said that you had a relationship with Marcus Ellison, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us how old he was back in 2020?
How old he was back in 2020? He just turned 43, so he was probably like 40.
Mario Hobson, Do you know how old he was?
No, sir.
You say he's around 40?
Possibly.
And I'm not gonna ask you, okay?
Yes, sir.
But you said that you were cooperating with the state on this.
Yes, sir.
And were you cooperating on the other cases as well?
Yes, sir.
When did you wind up making this decision to cooperate?
Well, initially, I was trying to protect Mr. Ellison, which they really did me nothing to any avail. So, and I just like to be honest and, tell the truth. I've always been like that.
But can you tell me when y'all said, okay, we got a deal?
By this time, I think I was in jail.
Where?
Jail. I went to jail.
Can you give me like years, month, or anything like that?
I would say within a month.
Did you sign any paperwork?
Yes, sir, I did.
And as you said, you've already admitted that you had a couple of theft convictions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You also said that my client followed you and was shooting.
Yes, sir.
What were you driving again?
A white 2020 Mustang.
And you were just driving around the roads around, where this all occurred, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm familiar with beach roads. You've never been around them before or anything like that.
No, sir.
But somehow you were able to lose, Jan, as far as following. Is that correct? That you went to a house?
Yes, sir.
Somehow you were able to lose him on the road, even though you say he was following.
Yes. What I did was once I left the church, I went right. I made a straight shot. I never turned off until I got to that particular house where I couldn't drive anymore.
But somehow just doing that is all it took to get away from Jan?
Yes, sir, because I was in a Mustang, he was in the truck. So it pins out. Yes, sir.
Yes, Judge, can I have just a moment? Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
May.
Mr. Ross, I'm gonna hand you this, two-page document that has a sticker on it that says States Exhibit 2 at the top. Just look at that for me if you would.
Yes, ma'am. I know what this is.
Okay, you know what that is? And in fact, if you look at the second page back here, does it have your signature on it?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And is that to appear to be a true and correct copy?
Yes, ma'am.
Show it.
No objection.
Your Honor, we'll have States Exhibit 2, the written proffer letter, signed by myself representing the DA's office, Ms. Ross and, Mr. Murley.
There being no objection, states 2 is admitted.
All right, and Ms. Ross, can you read for us the date on top of that plan?
The date is August 3rd, 2020.
So August 3rd, 2020 is when you signed and agreed to cooperating with the DA's office.
Yes, ma'am.
So you were pretty close, a little less than.
Yes, ma'am.
That's what discussion.
Mr. White. Mr. Ross, you may step down. What's your step is? State calling the additional witnesses.
Your Honor, we have no additional witnesses. We put off State's Exhibit number 3, which is a certified copy of the judgment of conviction and sentence of Marcus Detroit Ellison, indicating that he received a 12-year sentence.
No objection.
Being no objection, states 3 is admitted.
State arrest, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. White, I'm gonna go ahead and break for lunch at this time. Okay, so let's be back at 1:15. 1:15, all right. Where's the recess to 1:15?